The air is thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and cheap perfume. A low murmur hums through the crowd, the sound of commerce, of appraisal, of lives being priced. On a raised wooden platform, a man stands motionless, his feet coated in white chalk to mark him as foreign-born. A small placard, a titulus, hangs from his neck, listing his age, origin, and any special skills he might possess. He stares out over the heads of the bidders, his gaze fixed on nothing. He is a physician from Greece, a farmer from Gaul, a warrior from Britannia. But here, in the heart of Rome, he is none of those things. He is simply Merc's merchandise. This scene, played out daily in markets across the Roman world, was the engine that powered an empire. But the true horror of Rome's slave markets wasn't just in the chains or the auctioneer's gavel. It was in the chillingly systematic process of erasing a human being, of turning a person with a history, a family, and a name into a simple object for sale. Few back then, and even fewer now, understood the cold, calculated industry behind this transaction, where every human flaw was exploited and every virtue was given a price tag. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a science. If you enjoy uncovering history's darker chapters, remember to like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. To understand the Roman slave market, one must first understand Rome itself. This wasn't a marginal practice. It was the empire's economic and social foundation. At its height, historians estimate that as much as 1/3 of the population of Italy was enslaved. Millions of individuals. Their forced labor built the aqueducts, tilled the vast agricultural estates, mined the gold and silver, and served the domestic needs of every Roman with even a modest income. The empire's insatiable hunger for this labor was fed by three main arteries of human misery. The first and largest was conquest. When a Roman general triumphed, the spoils of war weren't just gold and territory, they were people. After his campaigns in Gaul, Julius Caesar famously boasted of capturing 1 million people, a staggering number who were marched in chains back toward the markets. The second artery was piracy and banditry. The Mediterranean, despite the Roman fleet, was a hunting ground where ships were seized and coastal villages raided, their inhabitants stolen away to be sold. Finally, and perhaps most insidiously, was birth. A child born to an enslaved mother was born a slave. Their fate was sealed from their first breath, creating a self-sustaining system of generational servitude. Before they ever saw a market, most captives endured a brutal journey. Chained together in long columns, they were marched for weeks, often with little food or water, or they were packed into the dark, suffocating holds of ships, treated with less care than the grain in the next compartment. Many died before reaching their destination. For the Romans, this was a simple calculation of loss, a business expense. Legally, these people had already been stripped of their humanity. In Roman law, a slave was not a persona, a person, but res, a thing, an object that could be bought, sold, abused, or killed at the owner's whim, with little legal consequence. This was the cold reality that awaited anyone who found themselves standing on the auction block. The slave market itself is a theater of despair. It is often located in a prominent public space, like the Forum, near the Temple of Castor. The dealers, known as mangones, are a class of men despised even by other Romans for their profession, yet they are essential. They operate with a practiced, almost theatrical efficiency. Upon arrival, the newly enslaved are put through a harrowing process of preparation. They are stripped, washed, and oiled until their skin gleams under the Italian Sunday. This isn't an act of kindness. It is the polishing of a product. Scars from whips or brands are sometimes hidden with cosmetics. Sickness concealed with tonics that bring a temporary flush of health to the cheeks. The auction begins. One by one, individuals are led onto the platform. The auctioneer, working for the mango, recites their details from the titulus hanging around their neck. A male, 20 years of age, from Britannia. Strong, unbroken, good for farm work. A potential buyer, perhaps a wealthy landowner, steps forward. He runs his hands over the man's arms and back, feeling for muscle. He forces open the man's mouth, checking his teeth like one would a horse, looking for signs of age or disease. He may order the man to run, to jump, to lift a heavy object, all to test the quality of his potential purchase. The man on the platform complies, his face a mask of resignation. Resistance would only invite a lash from the overseer's whip. For women, the inspection is even more violating. They are subjected to intrusive examinations in full view of the leering crowd, their fertility and physical attributes appraised for domestic service or, more often, forced concubinage. A beautiful young woman from Alexandria, with her education and exotic appeal, could fetch a fortune, destined for the villa of a senator. Meanwhile, a mother standing next to her might watch as her young child is sold separately to a different buyer, their desperate cries ignored by the bidders. Roman law had no provisions for keeping enslaved families together. They were property, and property could be divided. Not all slaves are sold on the open platform. The most valuable are kept aside for private sales. An educated Greek, capable of tutoring a wealthy Roman's children in rhetoric and philosophy, is worth exponentially more than a dozen field hands. A skilled German blacksmith or a Syrian cook would be presented to discerning buyers in a quieter, more exclusive setting. These individuals often wore a cap on their heads, a sign that the seller offered no warranty for them. They were sold as is. Conversely, the law, specifically the Aedilician Edict, compelled dealers to disclose any known defects. The titulus had to state if a person was prone to running away, had a sickness like epilepsy, or had attempted to take their own life. It was a buyer's guarantee, a law designed to protect a property investment, framing human trauma as a product flaw. The lowest rungs of this brutal hierarchy are sold in bulk lots. These are the men and women destined for the mines of Spain or the massive agricultural estates, the latifundia, of Sicily. They are often sold without individual inspection, their price determined by a rough head count. For them, purchase is a death sentence. Life expectancy in the Roman mines could be measured in months, not years. They would work in darkness until their bodies gave out, their final moments as anonymous as their arrival. As the hammer falls, a new master's brand might be seared into their skin, marking them permanently. The transaction is complete. Money changes hands. A life is redirected forever, not by fate, but by commerce. The sold individual is collared and led away, leaving the platform empty for the next soul to be priced. For the enslaved, the moment the sale was final was the beginning of a new, uncertain horror. Led away in chains, they left the market to face one of 1,000 possible fates, almost all of them bleak. The domestic slave in a senator's villa might have better food and shelter, but they lived under the constant, arbitrary power of their masters. They were vulnerable to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, their lives dictated by the whims of the family they served. Their proximity to Roman domestic life meant they were witnesses to, and often victims of, its most private cruelties. For them, there was no escape, no privacy, and no true safety. The vast majority, however, were destined for a far more brutal existence. On the massive agricultural estates, they worked from sunrise to sunset under the lash of an overseer, often housed in cramped, squalid barracks called ergastula, which were sometimes little more than underground prisons. Here, life was short, and humanity was a forgotten luxury. The same was true for those sent to the mines, condemned to a life of hard labor in lethal conditions, chipping away at rock in darkness until their bodies failed them. The market had been their final moment in the Sunday. The system's impact rippled through the empire itself. Rome's deep-seated fear of slave uprisings, most famously embodied by the revolt of Spartacus, was a direct consequence of this massive, dehumanizing trade. The rebellion, which began with just a few dozen gladiators and swelled into an army that threatened Rome itself, was a bloody testament to the desperation bred by the slave markets. In response, Roman control became even more brutal. The mass crucifixion of Spartacus's followers was a message, a warning that the fate of a rebellious slave was a public spectacle of agony. Ultimately, the very engine that powered the empire became a critical vulnerability. As Roman expansion slowed, the stream of new captives dwindled. The seemingly endless supply of cheap labor began to dry up, contributing to economic stagnation and social unrest that would, over centuries, help to unravel the fabric of the Roman world itself. The chalk on the feet eventually washes away. The placard is discarded, and the name a person was born with is deliberately forgotten, replaced by a new, Roman one. But the ghost of that erased identity remains. For every magnificent aqueduct that slices across the landscape, for every intricate mosaic floor in a Pompeian villa, for every triumphal arch celebrating a general's victory, there is an invisible ledger of human cost. The Roman slave market was more than a place of business. It was a factory that systematically dismantled human lives, turning people into the disposable fuel that fed the imperial machine. It raises a chilling question. How much of the glory of the ancient world was built not on stone and marble, but on the silent, forgotten suffering of millions? That's the true story most people never hear. What's your take on it? Let us know in the comments.